The phone was a cheap one. That's the first thing I noticed. Before the implications, before the fear, before any of the thoughts that followed. Just the object itself, a basic prepaid handset in a plain black case, tucked between the seat rail and the carpet on the passenger side, in the gap where things slide and get lost and are generally not looked for. I was reaching for a hair tie I had heard fall earlier in the drive. My fingers closed around something rectangular, and I pulled it out and looked at it, and my brain did the specific thing brains do in the half-second before a significant thought fully arrives. It went quiet. Just a flat neutral, almost observational. That is a phone. It was not a phone I had seen before. I looked at it for probably 4 seconds, maybe 5. The parking lot of the grocery store where we had stopped on the way home from dinner was lit in the yellowish way of parking lots at night, and in that light the phone looked very ordinary. Black case. Generic. Dark screen. The kind of phone that is bought to be unremarkable and is unremarkable. I put it back. I placed it exactly as I had found it, tucked between the rail and the carpet, face down at the same angle. I sat up straight. I put my hands in my lap. I looked at the windshield and then at the entrance of the grocery store, where my boyfriend, Theo, had gone to get the one thing we had forgotten on the way out of the restaurant. I had stayed in the car because I was tired and because my shoes were new and the lot was uneven, and I had decided approximately 40 minutes earlier over dessert that I was done walking for the day. I breathed. My name is Simone Archer. I'm 28 years old. And this is the story of what I did in the 36 hours after I found that phone. Not what I said, not how I confronted anyone, not what I demanded or accused or performed. What I did quietly, methodically, and without announcing it to anyone, including Theo, until I was ready. I want to tell it to you slowly, because the slowness is the entire point. Theo Park and I had been together for 2 years and 4 months when I found the phone. We had met through a friend of a friend connection. His college roommate was dating my co-worker, and we had ended up at the same rooftop barbecue in July 2 summers before, standing near the cooler at the same moment, both reaching for the same brand of sparkling water, both slightly embarrassed by the coincidence of it. He had said, "Go ahead," and I had said, "No, you," and we had both laughed and split the last 2 and stood there talking for an hour and a half while the party moved around us. He was 29, a software developer. Careful in the specific way that people who spend their professional lives with systems tend to be careful. Methodical about things that could be organized, looser about things that couldn't. He had a very clean desk at home, which I had noticed the first time I came to his apartment, and a very chaotic car, which I had noticed the second time, when he picked me up and had to move 3 coffee cups and a jacket from the passenger seat before I could get in. I had noted both things. I had filed them under. This is someone who controls the environments he prioritizes and releases the ones he doesn't. His work was his desk. His personal life was his car. Something about that had struck me as honest. He was kind. I want to say that before I say anything else, because it's the truest thing about him, and the story doesn't make full sense without it. Theo was one of the genuinely kind people I had known in my adult life. Not in the performative way, not in the way of people who want to be seen being kind, but in the quiet, consistent way that shows up in small moments, remembering things weeks after you said them, showing up when he said he would, adjusting without complaint, caring about your experience of things without needing credit for the caring. He was also private, not secretive, private. There is a difference, though I have spent some time since the parking lot examining where exactly that difference lives. Private people manage what they share and when. Secretive people hide. Theo managed. He had a period of his life before we were together, his mid-20s, a few years that he described only in outline, that he had come through and was not inclined to revisit in detail. I had not pushed. We had, in 2 years and 4 months, built the kind of relationship where I trusted that things emerged when he was ready, and things had emerged incrementally each year a little more than the last. This had felt to me like the natural pace of someone who opened slowly and thoroughly, rather than quickly and shallowly. I had not questioned it. Our relationship had been, until the parking lot, uncomplicated in the way that good relationships are uncomplicated, not frictionless. We disagreed about things. We had difficult conversations. There were moments that required navigation, but no static, no persistent low hum of something wrong that I was choosing not to examine. I was not a person who tolerated that hum without examining it. I had done the work to know that about myself. I had not been ignoring anything, which was what made the parking lot so disorienting. There was no prior warning I had explained away, no accumulation of small inconsistencies I had refused to look at. The phone appeared in my hand, and it was simply new information, unknown quantity, no context. Theo came back from the store 8 minutes after I put the phone back. He put the bag in the back seat and got in and said something about the last one on the shelf. Narrowly got it, the usual minor triumph of the errand successfully completed. I said something appropriate. He started the car. I looked out my window at the parking lot and I thought, there are 2 possibilities. The first was the one my stomach had gone to, immediately. The fast, cold arrival of it before any other thought. The familiar architecture of a particular kind of lie. A second phone means a second line. A second line means something is running parallel to the life I can see. I was thinking it, and I was simultaneously examining the fact that I was thinking it, trying to determine whether the thought was accurate perception or whether it was the first available story the brain finds when it encounters the unfamiliar and is frightened. Because the brain does that. I know it does that. I have watched it do that to other people, and I have, in smaller ways, watched it do it to me. The brain wants narrative. It will take an object, a phone, a receipt, a name said in a certain tone, and it will build a story around it before the evidence is complete. And once the story is built, the brain stops looking for alternatives. It starts looking for confirmation. I was not going to let my brain do that. Not yet. The second possibility was everything else. I ran through everything else with the same deliberateness I use for anything that requires precision. Theo worked in software development. He had test devices. He had told me this once, explaining the 2 identical-looking tablets in his apartment, one personal and one a work device he kept for app testing. Was it possible the phone was a test device? An old handset kept for some development purpose, tucked in the car and forgotten? Possible. He was a private person with a period of his past he had not fully described to me. Had he mentioned at any point something that might explain a secondary device, a logistical reason, something administrative, something connected to that time in his life? I went through what I knew. I went through it carefully. I found nothing that explained the phone, but I also found nothing that ruled it out. The absence of an explanation was not the same as evidence of the worst explanation. I knew that. I held onto it. Or it was the first thing, a second phone. The familiar, ugly, completely ordinary thing that second phones often are. I genuinely did not know. And sitting in the passenger seat while Theo navigated home and talked about something at work, something about a deployment that had gone sideways, I made a decision that went against every instinct I had at that moment. I was going to stay in the not knowing, not forever, not as avoidance, for exactly as long as it took to have actual information rather than the simulation of information that is fear dressed in narrative form. An uncharged phone in a car is not evidence of anything except an uncharged phone in a car. I needed more than the object before I said a single word. I am an administrative coordinator at a mid-size litigation firm. I've worked there for 4 years, and I am good at the job in the way of people who understand that the work is fundamentally about the movement of information, where it is, where it needs to go, what it means in context and what it doesn't mean without it. I manage case schedules, document filings, the logistics of things passing through a process that has rules and sequences and moments where the wrong step at the wrong time costs something that cannot be recovered. I work around lawyers every day. I have absorbed, through years of proximity, the principle that a conclusion reached before the evidence is assembled is not a conclusion. It is a preference in disguise. I have watched very intelligent people commit to a theory before the discovery was complete and spend the next 6 months finding evidence for it and discarding evidence against it, and arrive at trial less prepared than they should have been because the theory had foreclosed the questions that would have saved them. I applied everything I had absorbed to the next 36 hours. Here is what I decided in the car. Between the parking lot and Theo's apartment, I was not going to say anything that night. Not because I was afraid of the conversation. I have never been afraid of necessary conversations. Because necessary conversations require preparation, and preparation requires information, and I had none. A confrontation at that moment would have been nothing but emotion projected at a man who had just bought groceries and was talking about a deployment problem. An emotion without information is the fastest way to destroy something you might not need to destroy. I was going to spend the evening normally, not as a performance of normalcy, or rather, it was performance in the way that all managed social interaction is performance, the deliberate choice of what to show and when. I was going to be present, because I am always present, and the evening was going to happen, and I was going to observe it with the added attention of someone who was now looking for more data. Not hunting, looking. In the morning, when Theo went to the gym, Saturday, 7 a.m., without exception, reliable as public transit if public transit were reliable, I was going to get in his car and look at the phone. I had his spare key on my keychain. He had given it to me 8 months ago during a week when I had been staying over frequently while my apartment was being repainted. He had not asked for it back. I had not offered. I put my hands in my lap. I looked at the road. I waited. I have replayed that evening carefully in the months since, the way you replay something you want to understand fully. What I find, examining it with the distance of time, is that it was mostly ordinary. Genuinely, unremarkably ordinary, which is its own kind of strange. We made dinner at Theo's apartment. His kitchen, which I knew as well as my own, the arrangement of the pots on the rack, the drawer that has to be lifted slightly to open, the overhead light that is 3 watts too bright for the room, and that we had been meaning to replace the bulb in for 6 months. We moved around each other with the choreography of people who have shared a space enough times to have negotiated it without discussion. He handled the protein. I made the salad. He tasted the sauce and made a face and adjusted something. And I said, better or worse? And he said, better now. And I said, why do you always under-season the first time? And he said, because you always over-season, and I'm accounting for the combined effect. This was a joke we had made before, a specific, repeated joke, one of those small linguistic artifacts that accumulate in relationships and become their own shorthand for something. Ease, maybe. Shared history. The right to expect that the other person knows the reference. I laughed. And here is the thing I want to tell you honestly. The laughter was real. It was not performed. I was not faking the ease of that kitchen in order to seem normal. The ease was actually there, existing simultaneously with the other thing I was carrying. People contain multiple things at once. I was someone who was comfortable in that kitchen with that person, and I was also someone who had found an object 4 hours ago that might mean the kitchen was going to stop being mine to be comfortable in. Both were true. Both were present. They did not cancel each other out. After dinner, we watched something, I cannot now tell you what, which tells you something about my level of actual attention versus apparent attention. Theo fell asleep on the couch partway through, which he does when he's tired and comfortable, which I have always found oddly reassuring. the specific vulnerability of a person who falls asleep in your presence without self-consciousness. I sat beside him and watched whatever it was alone and let my mind work. I thought about what I might find in the morning. I tried to hold both possibilities with equal weight, the innocent one and the one I was afraid of, and not let either one foreclose the other. The innocent one, a test, device, an old handset, something mundane and entirely explicable. The other one, the thing I didn't want to name directly, but that was there, exerting a kind of gravitational pull on every thought that got close to it. I tried to stay in the genuine middle. It was hard. The brain resists the middle. The brain wants resolution. I sat with the resistance and did not give in to it. Before I went to sleep, I did one thing. I looked at Theo's phone, his regular phone, the one I had seen every day for 2 years. I want to be precise about what I was doing because the distinction matters to me. I was not going into his messages. I was not reading anything private. I was not doing the thing that I would have needed his trust to do and that I was not willing to take without asking. I typed a partial search into his contacts. A name, not the name of any woman I had reason to suspect, but a name that had surfaced once, months ago, in a context that I had registered without acting on. One of those small things that gets filed and not retrieved until circumstances make it relevant. One contact came up. The name and nothing else. No number. A contact entry with a name and no attached information, which is the kind of thing that exists when someone creates a contact placeholder and doesn't fill it in, or when someone creates a contact and deletes the information and keeps only the name. I put the phone back where it had been. I noted what I had seen. I went to sleep in his bed, in the specific position I had been sleeping in for 2 years and 4 months, left side, closer to the wall, and I lay in the dark and breathed and did not reach any conclusions. I slept badly, but I slept. Theo's alarm went off at 6:50. He silenced it without fully waking and lay still for another 4 minutes, which I know because I had been awake since 6:15 and had been watching the ceiling and tracking time by feel. At 6:54, he got up. He moved quietly through the apartment. He always moved quietly in the morning, a consideration I had noticed early and appreciated. He showered. He dressed. He came back to the doorway and looked at me, and I was doing the thing I had been doing for 30 minutes, which was breathing with the regularity of someone asleep. He left at 7:12. I waited until I heard his car clear the lot. Then I got up, made coffee in the French press, and stood at his kitchen window and drank half of it, while the street below went about its Saturday morning. A woman walking a dog, 2 people jogging in the synchronized way of people who have been running together long enough to have matched their pace without trying. A car backing carefully out of a narrow space. I put on my coat. I took his spare key from my keychain. I went down to the lot. His car was parked in the same spot he always used, second from the end, close enough to the stairwell that he didn't have to walk far in the rain. I unlocked it. I got in the passenger seat. I closed the door. The car smelled like him. The faint coffee and cedar thing that I had stopped noticing until this moment, when I was noticing everything. I reached between the seat rail and the carpet. The phone was still there. I held it in both hands. It was cold from the night. I pressed the power button. The screen lit up. A generic home screen, default wallpaper, the kind of blank slate a phone looks like before it belongs to anyone. It was not password protected. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment because I think people often assume they know. The movies have trained us to expect shaking hands, racing heart, the visible symptoms of crisis arriving. That is not what happened. What happened was a specific and complete calm. The kind that is not peace but focus, the narrowing that occurs when something important is happening and your body understands that falling apart right now is not available as an option. I was very still, very present. My hands were steady. I opened the phone. No messages, no contacts, no call log, no photos, no downloaded applications. A factory clean device with no history and no personal information, and one single item in the notes application, one document. Untitled, saved 3 months ago based on the timestamp at the bottom of the screen. I read it. He had written it in November. I know the exact date because the notes application records it, and because November was 2 months after his mother's diagnosis. Theo's mother, June, had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's disease in September of that year. He had told me the night after her appointment, sitting across from me at dinner with the particular stillness of someone delivering information they have been holding carefully. He had told me the facts, the diagnosis, the stage, the treatment plan, what the neurologist had said, with the precision of someone who had memorized them, and then he had been quiet for a moment, and then he had said, "She caught it early, which is the best thing," and moved on. I had asked if he wanted to talk about it. He had said he was still processing. I had said okay and meant it and had tried, in the weeks that followed, to hold space for when the processing became shareable. The space, as it turned out, had been large enough to seem like absence. He had been further away than I had understood, and the distance had not been away from me so much as inside something I could not see, which is a different thing, though from the outside it can look the same. The note was 7 paragraphs. I am going to tell you what was in it without quoting it directly, because some of it was private in a way that belongs to him and not to this story. He had written about fear, the specific fear of watching someone you love change in ways that are happening too slowly to track on any single day, but that compound, week over week, into something undeniable. He had written about Thanksgiving. A specific moment at the door when his mother had held his hand leaving, held it for longer than she usually would, and he had thought, standing there, that she might be holding on to the feeling of it, memorizing it. He had written that he did not know if this was true or if he was projecting, and that not knowing was its own particular horror. He had written about his father, who was managing the situation with the systematic efficiency of a man for whom practical action is the primary language of love and care, who had researched doctors and care options and printed everything and put it in a binder, and had not, in the month since September, cried in front of Theo once. Theo had written that he did not know how to reach his father in this, that they were both in the same grief and both alone inside it, which was a particular kind of lonely. He had written about me. He had written that he knew he had not been present, fully present for some months, that when he was with me, he was always also somewhere else, in his parents' house, in the space between who his mother was now and who she was going to become. He had written that he was sorry for this distance, and that he understood it was not fair to carry it without explaining it, and that he kept reaching for the words in real time and finding they weren't there yet, that the words lived somewhere he hadn't gotten to yet. He had written, I don't know why I'm writing this here instead of saying it out loud to her. Maybe because writing is how I find out what I think before I've decided what I'm allowed to feel. Maybe because saying it means watching her face understand that I'm scared, and I'm not ready to be that visible yet. But I'm working toward it. I am actually working toward it. The last paragraph said, I bought this phone because I needed somewhere to put things while I was finding my way to saying them. When I'm ready, I'll say them. I'm going to leave it somewhere she might find it. She's good at finding things. She's good at understanding what they mean. I think she'll know what to do with it. I sat in the car. The morning had gone bright around me. The specific clarity of an October Saturday, the kind of day that arrives after weeks of gray and feels like a gift that has been slightly delayed. A neighbor walked past the car with a large dog I recognized, a ridiculous, cheerful animal that pulled at its leash with the absolute conviction of a creature for whom every patch of grass contains infinite possibility. I watched it pass. I read the note again. Then I read it a third time. Before I tell you what I did next, I need to stop and explain something about the 3 months between November and the parking lot. I had noticed things. Not large things. Small things. the kind that individually mean nothing and collectively form a shape if you are paying attention. Theo had been quieter at dinner some evenings, not sad, not withdrawn, just present in a slightly diminished way, the way a radio is when the signal is good but not perfect. I had noticed. I had not pushed. He had started going to see his parents slightly more often, once a month instead of every 6 or 8 weeks. He mentioned this casually, and I had not asked for more detail because it felt like his to navigate. He had texted me once, on a Thursday night, something that didn't quite fit. Thinking about you, at 11 p.m., unprompted, no context. I had texted back. He hadn't replied until morning and had not explained the late message, and I had not asked. 3 things, each one nothing, individually, together. A person carrying something I couldn't see. I had sensed the weight of it without knowing the shape. I had been trying to leave room for it and had perhaps left so much room that the room itself had felt like distance. The phone was the shape. The note was the shape becoming visible. I sat with this in the car for a long time. Then I called Adaeze. Adaeze Okonkwo has been my closest friend since we were 14 years old and were placed in adjacent desks in a 9th grade English class and discovered, within a week, that we had the same taste in books and the same specific disdain for assigned seating. She answers her phone at 7:30 in the morning without complaint, which is one of her better qualities and which I have relied on more times than I can count. I told her everything. The parking lot, the evening, the morning, the note. I told it in order, with the precision I use when I need to be precise, and she listened without interrupting, which is one of the reasons I've kept her close for 14 years. She knows the difference between the kind of telling that needs interruption and the kind that needs to be let out fully before it is touched. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it honestly. I took the question seriously. "Relieved," I said, and then immediately guilty about the relief because none of this is about me. "Both of those can be true," she said. "It can be his situation and also affect you. Those aren't the same thing, but they can coexist." "I know. What are you going to do with it?" "I'm going to be there for it," I said. "Whatever it looks like when he's ready to bring it to me. I'm going to make sure he knows he doesn't have to be ready on any timeline except his own." She was quiet for another moment, and I recognized the quality of it. The quiet she keeps when she is deciding whether to say the other thing. "Say the other thing," I said. "You already knew something was wrong," she said, "before the phone." I knew something was off. "Same thing." I didn't know what it was. "No," she said, "but you weren't panicking about it. You were holding space. And then you found the phone and your first instinct was still to hold space rather than to blow it open." I looked out the windshield at the October morning. "What does that tell you?" she asked. I thought about it. "That I trust him," I said, and then that I trusted him before I had the evidence to. "Yes," Adaeze said, "that's what it tells you." We stayed on the phone for another 20 minutes, talking about other things. Her project at work, a book we had both been reading, the plans for her sister's visit in November, normal things, the way we always came back to normal things after the difficult ones, which was its own kind of skill, the returning. When we hung up, I sat in the car a little longer. Then I went back inside and made more coffee and waited for Theo to come home from the gym. He came home at 9:40, which I know because I had been reading on the couch and had looked up when I heard his key in the lock. He came in smelling like soap from the gym showers. He set down his bag. He saw me on the couch, and his face did the thing it did when he was genuinely glad. Not performed gladness. The real thing, which on Theo's face is a very slight shift around the eyes before the rest of it catches up. He sat down beside me. He reached over and took a sip from my coffee mug without asking, which he had always done, and which I had decided, early in our relationship, was not something worth being bothered by. Some things you decide to release. That was one. I put my book down. I had thought, in the car and in the apartment while I waited, about how to begin. I had considered and discarded several approaches. I had landed on the most direct one, which is usually the correct one for me. I said, "I want to talk about your mom." He looked at me. Something moved across his face, not quite surprise, more like recognition. The look of someone who had been standing near a door and has just heard someone on the other side of it try the handle. "Okay," he said. "I know you've been managing it mostly alone," I said. "I know that's your way. You process things before you can share them, and I've been trying to respect that. But I want you to know that I've noticed the distance. I'm not saying this to make you feel accused of anything. I'm saying it so you know that I've been here, paying attention, holding space, even when it might have felt like I was just continuing normally." He was looking at his hands. He had large hands, which was one of the first things I had noticed about him at the rooftop barbecue, and they were resting on his knees in the particular way they rested when he was sitting with something difficult. "I should have talked to you," he said. "You weren't ready. I think I understand that." "How do you understand it so well?" He looked up. "How are you this calm about it?" I thought about the phone in the car, about the note, about sitting in the passenger seat at 7:18 in the morning with the specific, focused calm of a person who has chosen to know before she speaks. "I pay attention," I said. "I've been paying attention to you for 2 years, and I think I know the difference between something being wrong between us and something being hard for you inside yourself." He was quiet. "Is it the second one?" I asked. He nodded, slowly, then more certainly. Then he put his face in his hands and took a long breath, and when he lifted his face again, he was already talking. He talked for a long time. He talked about September, the diagnosis, the day of the appointment, driving his parents home afterward in a silence he had not known how to break. He talked about October and November, the accumulating evidence of small changes in his mother that he had been cataloging the way you catalog things you are afraid to name directly. The repetitions, the pauses, the particular way she had hugged him at the door at Thanksgiving, longer than usual, holding on. He talked about his father, who was managing with such systematic efficiency that there was no room for Theo to be afraid. Inside it, that every conversation about the diagnosis was a conversation about logistics, doctors, medication schedules, care options, the practical apparatus of the situation, and that the space for just being scared, just being a son who was watching something happen to his mother had not appeared, that he had not known how to create it. He talked about me, about knowing for months that he was not fully present, about wanting to explain it and finding, each time, that the explanation required him to arrive at the feeling first, and the feeling kept being somewhere he hadn't quite reached. He said he had been writing things down, that he had started writing things because writing was how he located his own thoughts before he could speak them. He looked at me when he said this, and I held his gaze. "I wrote some things down on a phone," he said, "an old handset I bought. I was going to—" He stopped. "I left it somewhere I thought you might find it. I thought if you found it, maybe it would be easier than saying it directly," which was cowardly. "It was human," I said. He looked at me. "I found it," I said. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of something that had been held separately, finally being held together. He looked at me for a long moment with an expression I recognized, the particular look he had when something had landed exactly where it needed to. "When?" he said. "Yesterday evening," I said, reaching for a hair tie. He laughed. It was surprised and a little helpless and entirely real, the laugh that arrives when the situation is so specifically itself that there's nothing left to do but receive it. "And you didn't say anything," he said. "I didn't have information yet. You read it this morning." "Yes." "And then you waited for me to come home and you asked about my mom." "Yes." He looked at his hands again. Then he looked at me. "You could have confronted me last night," when I got back in the car. With what? I said. A phone I hadn't looked at? No. That would have been fear, not information. I don't make decisions from fear if I can help it. He was quiet for a moment. She's going to keep changing, he said. Not a question. The statement of someone who had been holding a fact alone and was now putting it into the room between us. Yes, I said. I don't know how to do this. You don't have to know yet, I said. You just have to not do it alone. He cried twice during that conversation. The first time, briefly, when he talked about his mother's hands. The second time, toward the end, when he said that he had been afraid I would feel shut out, that the distance would look like not caring rather than not knowing how to carry it in front of someone else. I did not make anything of either time. I stayed present. I handed him nothing except my attention, which was the only thing I actually had to give. When it was over, we sat in the quiet for a while. Outside, the October morning was doing what October mornings do, bright and cool and entirely itself, indifferent to the conversations happening inside. I should have done this months ago, he said. You did it when you were ready, I said. I wrote it down first, he said. I put it in the car because I thought... He shook his head. I don't know exactly what I thought. That you'd find it and that would make it easier. But that's not fair to you, expecting you to do the finding. I'm a good finder, I said. He smiled. The real one. The one that moves the eyes first. I know, he said. You're good at understanding what you find. I had read those words in the note that morning, hearing them spoken, in his voice, in his apartment, with the morning light coming through the windows. That was the moment I understood what those 36 hours had been for. Not for the revelation, for this. For being in this room, with this person, with enough ground beneath me to receive what he was finally able to give. That was 8 months ago. Theo's mother, June, is being managed carefully through an early phase. There are good weeks and harder ones. This is the landscape of it, not a single decline, but a texture of variation. Some days more familiar than others, some conversations clear, and some requiring patience. She is being seen regularly. She is doing the things that help. She has opinions about which jigsaw puzzle brands have the best piece tolerance, which she has shared with me in detail across several Saturday visits. Theo and I go to his parents' house once a month. This began the month after our Saturday conversation, when Theo said, I want to go see them this weekend, will you come? With the directness of someone who has decided to stop carrying things alone. I said yes. We went. We've gone every month since. At his parents' house, I sit at the kitchen table with June, and we work on puzzles. She keeps records, times, completion, dates, notes about which ones were harder than their piece count suggested. She tells me about Theo as a boy, about the neighborhood, about a trip to Portugal 20 years ago that she returns to, in the telling with the pleasure of someone revisiting a favorite room. I listen and I record things the way I record things worth keeping, carefully, specifically, in a place where they won't be lost. In the other room, Theo and his father talk. I can hear them. The low particular exchange of two men learning slowly the register they hadn't found before. The diagnosis had cracked something open between them, Theo told me once on the drive home, that the shared grief, because it could no longer be managed into silence, had become the thing that let them finally speak directly about other things. I didn't know we could talk like this, he said. I thought this was just who we were to each other. People aren't fixed, I said. They're who they've learned to be so far. He thought about this for the rest of the drive. I know because he was quiet in the way he is when something is taking root. The second phone is gone. He threw it away himself a week after our conversation and told me after the fact. He did not make a ceremony of it. I don't need the workaround anymore, he said. He doesn't. We don't. That is, in the end, the most accurate summary of what changed between us. We had been a relationship that functioned well at the surface and needed, underneath the surface, to learn how to hold weight in view of each other. The phone was the weight making itself visible. The conversation was the first real practice of holding it together. We are still learning. We will probably always be learning. That's not a problem. That's what it is. I want to say something to you about those 36 hours because I've been thinking about what they mean beyond my own story. We are very practiced, as a culture, at the immediate reaction. The screenshot posted, the confrontation filmed, the accusation launched from the position of someone who decided what the evidence meant before the evidence was complete. I understand the impulse. When you find something frightening, the fastest way to stop feeling the fear is to act on it. Explosion feels like agency. Staying still feels like passivity. But staying still is not passivity. Staying in the not knowing is not the same as accepting it. It is the choice to gather what you need before you decide what to do with what you have. To be, as precisely as possible, a person who is responding to what is actually happening rather than what you are afraid is happening. I put the phone back because I had 4 seconds and no information. I spent the evening in the ordinary rhythm of that kitchen because it was the truth of that evening. We were people who cooked together and made the same joke and moved around each other with the ease of time. I woke up early on Saturday and breathed and waited. I walked to the car and read what he had written and sat with it until I understood it. And then I came back inside and made more coffee and waited for him to come home, and I began the conversation from a place where I actually had something to offer. He wrote in the note, "She's good at understanding what she finds." I didn't know he thought that about me until I read it, but I think it's the truest thing he has said, and I want to be worthy of it. The finding is the accident. The understanding is the work. One last thing, the hair tie, the one I was reaching for when my fingers found the phone. I never did find it. It rolled somewhere beyond the seat rail into a space I couldn't reach, and I have not found it since. The car has been cleaned twice since October, and it has not resurfaced. I lost a hair tie and found a note that changed everything. I don't believe in signs or fate or the orchestrated design of small accidents. I believe in paying attention to what is actually in front of you and making deliberate choices about what to do with it. The hair tie fell because hair ties fall. The phone was there because Theo had put it there and was waiting in his private and particular way for the moment when it would be found. I happened to be the one reaching. I found it. I put it back. I breathed. I waited. I read. I sat in the car with October happening outside. I called my oldest friend. I went back inside. I made coffee. I held the space. I opened the conversation. I held the door open. He walked through. That's the whole story. The finding is not the story. What you do with what you find, that is always, only, the story. Thank you for staying through the slow parts. They were the point. If this landed somewhere real for you, if you've ever been in the 36 hours, in the space between knowing something and knowing what it means, drop a comment. Tell me which direction you went. I read every one. I'll see you in the next one.